Hello, everyone. This is Joe Whitcomb with another episode of Reboot Your Relationship, and I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy out there. And, we're all practicing this social distancing, and this can bring up a lot of different challenges for all of us. And but I'm really hoping and praying that that what we all are going through together, that we're all in this together, and that we're discovering new things about ourselves and about our relationship with society, and a greater appreciation and affection for one another. And I think this is the first time that anyone the whole world's been going through the same thing at exactly the same time and experiencing the same things. And I think this is really a huge shift for everybody, and I know it is for me. And I've actually been off the grid for the last several weeks from podcasts. My own dad's been in the hospital in and out. He's 91 this month, so he's doing okay, but he is elderly with some vulnerabilities, and I know there's a lot of people out there with family members and that are out there also trying to make it one day at a time, and here we go. All right, so we're going to focus today on one of the things that I particularly focus on quite a bit, and that is aversive childhood experiences, and in the sense of post-traumatic stress reordering in adult survivors of child abuse. And that's typically a very big that's a lot of work to be doing, but we're here, and we're going to continue our work because I think this is actually very relevant to what's going on today with the trauma in the world. This is not a small t trauma. This is a capital T trauma, and trauma is experienced very differently by many of us, especially if you do have a history of trauma and abuse. This can be either a time of feeling very much more disassociated or detached from reality experiences sometimes, or maybe the opposite, maybe just being a little bit more hypervigilant or heightened and anxious right now, or isolating. I know for me right now, being someone with post-traumatic stress disorder from the childhood aversive experiences, as well as military wartime trauma, I know it's harder right now when there's all this uncertainty to regulate. So if you are finding yourself isolating, alienating, feeling more anxious, depressed, give me a call, 310-560-0726. That's 310-560-0726, or you can click on a link in the podcast itself and find a way to reach me and book a free 30-minute session. I am a trauma-informed relationship psychotherapist, so we're going to be, again, just focusing on the same things that we always focus on, and that's just bringing healing and health and freedom and integrity and connection and that sense of love and belonging and significance back into our wholeness and our way of being. And for a lot of us that have struggled with worthiness or struggled with abuse, these can be very challenging times, but I want to let you know we're all in this together and you're not alone. But I do want to go through and I've been getting so many emails and so many phone calls lately of people that are getting re-traumatized or victimized right now, not feeling like they have a sense of safety or they can find higher ground or a safe haven or a secure base. And there may be a reason for that, but we want to help guide you into a new world of infinite possibilities. And I'll tell you, it's talking to my kids, my family, everyone around the world, and just getting the feedback. This time is very unsettling. Obviously, it's a time of it's tragic, and it's bringing up a lot of our own fears. And I hope this segment can help us begin to make sense of some of those things. And, the atonement here for all of us today, I pray, is in our shift in our perception in the world. If we're going to heal the war in the world, we have to heal the war between the sexes. And to heal the war between the sexes, we have to heal the war within ourselves and heal that. Bring in the wounded child, shall we? And let's talk so that we can get to the playmate of our healthy child. And but we're going to talk today again a little bit about trauma, attachments, and some of those emotions and the impact, the long-term impact and imprints of that as an adult survivor of child abuse. And that's such an important thing to think about, survivors, right? But also to move beyond just surviving and to thriving as adults. Because again, the wounded child, as we get into this, to understand the certain, what's the word I'm looking for, accommodations that we make or ways of coping or strategies that we created to survive, that served us as children, whether it was being, kind of taking on that wounded child with black and white thinking, all or nothing, all good, all bad, relentless, either hypervigilance, more risk-taking, or more anger and hypervigilance and lashing out, or shutting down, stonewalling. All these symptoms, guys, that we use as strategies for that adaptive child to cope. And we want to honor her and him and say thank you. Thank you for showing me another way, that this, as tragic as it was, is the perfect gift and just the right blessing. And my call here is that we never waste our pain. We never waste the pain. We find a way to overcome, right? And that's part of the hero's journey, leaving what we've known and to the unknown world. And we stand on that threshold between the known and unknown, where we have certainty into all this uncertainty and mystery, and that can be scary sometimes, but you're not alone on this walk. You got your tribe here with Reboot Your Relationship and the Relationship Society, and how we're dealing with all that stuff right now. But I'm grateful to be here, and we're going to be, and also if you guys ever want to call or text me or inbox me with your questions, I do get them. I want to invite you to ask questions. Please share with your family, friends, if these podcasts have been helpful for you. And I know not all help's helpful. We want to make it helpful help. So here we go. All right. So as a trauma specialist, one of the things that we believe is what's most tragic about child abuse and neglect is the exploitation of your child's attachment to the parent. If you ever get a chance to go back and watch on YouTube, just Google still-faced experiment with the baby. It's about 2.5 minutes. But just get a chance to give you some shared context here, some way of connecting to that. Go ahead and watch that video, and I'll remind you at the end, but it's called the still-face experiment, just talking about the imprinting of our attachment styles. Because to be sure, it is, for all of us, it's far easier to abuse one's own children, precisely because their love and loyalty to the parent renders children much more compliant than they would be to, let's say, a stranger. And it's exactly this attachment exploitation that teaches children that they're not safe in a relationship or to other human beings. So that sense of security gets diminished, or something occurs. And again, my bias is that we are born into relationship, for relationship, love, that sense of connection, belonging, and then we learn relationship through relationship, and we get into all of these, multiple dimensions co-occurring, that not one can really define the conflict or the challenges because of all these different systemic issues. But then we get wounded in relationship, as we've been talking, and then we get healed in a context of relationship. And that is the vehicle. It is the path, the practice to our own healing and recovery, the atonement, the undoing of fear, shame, returning to love. And that's really an important part of just understanding that this path, this practice, whether it's, because, throughout our life, sometimes life, love has been that circus, right? Or that life and love has been that road to, the ghost town, or it's a dead end. And all these ways that we've kind of navigated through things don't really serve us the way we'd like them to. And right now, especially as we take that soulful look back inside to see where, we need to heal. But we know that loss of security and safety, that something fractured in that attachment injury, something deep inside that we don't have words for. If we do, it can be too terrifying, because we made a promise, a vow, an agreement to ourselves that we will never be treated a certain way ever again. And so it's hard for us to be able to talk about those things, because and here's what we need to begin to do, is we need to add new strategies and context and skills and understanding and wisdom and compassion for that kid, right? The wounded child. And we can't really take away anything like the defenses and things that are there to have protected you. So we want to honor that. At the same time, though, begin to ask the questions, not just what am I supposed to learn here, because we keep injuring that mutual injury again in these relationships, but also to be able to work through this in a way that we can get back to good. So we can add before we subtract. We can't just take away all those sophisticated defense strategies, because, hey, they work. So let's honor your little boy, your little girl, and say thank you. Thank you so much for taking a stand for me when nobody else would. Here's the thing, though. We're going to talk about emotional, physical, some sexual abuse stuff today. Because physical abuse itself does not necessarily cause trouble, right? Most people, we all have physical injuries, right? Fractures or burns during childhood, due to some purely accidental causes, and we haven't been harmed by it because we had been comforted or cared for by good caregivers, and at the time of the incident. So damage does come when injuries are inflicted by those to whom one looks for love and protection, and there is no relief from the trauma. It's kind of the good, the bad, the ugly. The good, is here, it's there, but then sometimes the bad comes up, and there is that distress, there is that disconnection, and there is that pain, but there is a resolution and a repair back to the good. But when the bad stays bad and it doesn't get into the back to good, it goes into the ugly, because again, this becomes the chronic trauma, that reenactment and that trauma loop, trauma bonds that we begin to get into. And as we look at this, we start understanding the impact, because it is the emotional and physiological and psychological setting in which the sexual maltreatment occurs, and with whom it occurred, and that makes a difference and can cause lasting damage, whether it's someone who's close to the family or outside the family, or someone that you trust, because your brain is hardwired for that love and connection and feeling safety. And when the person that you believe is the greatest source of it's supposed to be the greatest source of comfort and safety is now the villain, and now your brain doesn't know what to do. Come close, get away. You're supposed to be my safety. I can't leave you. So what do? I can't escape, can't flee, and we internalize all that shame and pain, and that that hurt goes to harm, and the pain goes to suffering. And those are the things that we've got to begin to realize and understand, that there is a way to heal. The hurt will come, pain will be there, But if we don't go to the hospital and we break a leg, we don't go to the hospital and deal with these treatments and really getting resource in that, we will continue to reenact these dances in our relationships. I'm just calling you guys just to take this time now when we're all still and we're all here to really spend the time healing, whether it's abandonment trauma or physical, sexual trauma, emotional trauma, all these things that come up because they do have this, a direct impact and do cause lasting changes, as you know, because children are born into the world absolutely dependent and helpless, right? You look at a baby, they can't feed themselves, they can't clothe themselves, they can't do anything, so they depend on others for food, that warmth, cleanliness, protection from threat. And children's natural and healthy helplessness is transformed into terror and despair when those needs are ignored, or when a parent says, let's make a deal with those needs or whatever, because those needs are not. And we see this a lot of times, and we'll talk about this a little bit more too, when people do go through trauma or sexual trauma or rape, and then they're made the not just the victim, but they're blamed and accused of that at the same time. And every time they bring them into therapy for these disturbances, they reinvigorate and re-traumatize and victimize, because it's like, well, you're the problem. You're not the problem. You're not the problem. You did not ask for this. You didn't wake up one day and go, oh, I can't wait for X to happen. Nothing in the world prepares you for this stuff. Nothing. Nothing prepares for that being blindsided and getting punched in the face or kicked in the back or held down or abandoned or ignored. Nothing in the world prepares us for that. But we learn, right? We learn, and our body keeps score, and we learn, right? We learn these things. And here's what I want. So the thing is that we got to remember the body does keep score. Our body, we're good at receiving, accepting the fact that our body keeps score. When you were a child and you were riding a bike and your parent was holding the bike and you had to learn to balance the bike, and your memory neurons and the memory cells in your physical body and all those muscles are teaching you unconsciously, subconscious, in a way, to balance the bike. And then they let go of the bike, and now the bike's staying. Now you're able to balance, and that's why they say, once you never forget how to ride a bike, you just hop back on. Well, it's the same thing. I mean, our body keeps score when it comes to trauma too, the positive and the negative, the good and the bad, the ugly. And so it's important to go, okay, something else is going. We can't outthink some of this stuff because it's occurring. All these multiple dimensions are co-occurring simultaneously. And to slow this down, to really get connected to this process and get connected to what's happening within you and also the space between. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I've done all my healing, I've done all my work, I've been doing healing, why am I still having a problem with my relationships? Well, that's a great question. Because we don't just heal within the brain and the body. Okay? Relationships are like a dance. And so you have the within part, the me, and then I have to deal with you, the we, the space between. So we're broken in these three ways. Me, you, we. This we-ness, this space, this sacred, holy space between those strings and attachments that are either, they're either detached or too infused or something happens. And we got to get into talking about also that healing between. And I hear, I hear this too all the time. People tell me they're very self-aware. And you may be very self-aware, and that's really good. But we also have to be other-aware to know that's the emotional intelligence. I can be aware of myself, but being other-aware and having compassion and empathy for others, because we didn't get that necessarily. We love because we've been loved first, but if we didn't get love or trust, it's really hard to give that trust out there. So we're here because as children, going back to the adult survivors, adult abuse here, these aversive childhood experiences, childhood, should be the safest, most secure time of no risk dependency. It's that time where you can have that secure base, knowing, hey, they can go out in the world, fall down, get hurt, and trust and know, hey, mom and dad's got my back, or I'm safe. But many children, in desperation, we learn to care prematurely for themselves, becoming more the parentified child, where you may be taking care of your mom and dad's emotional needs or physical needs, and you exchange that authentic true self for connection because that's food, but it's at the expense of trust in others, this emotional growth and self-acceptance. Unfortunately, though, we try as we might, these children can never absolutely ensure their survival simply because it never absolutely was within your control. It was never in your control, within your power or freedom to choose. It wasn't in your control. Now, as an adult, it is, right? Because we're adults. But as a child, that when you're in that shame story, in that situation, that space, whatever that attachment, injury, wound, trauma was for you in that moment, right? You had absolutely no control, and that sense of powerlessness and helplessness would ensue. And we're stuck. And try as you might, parents can't always protect their children from trauma. Like a relative dies, or a house burns down, or the coronavirus takes a life, or a child witnesses a fatal car accident, or the child's molested by someone outside the family and terrorized into keeping a secret, holding that secret, internalizing that. But children, and we can survive intact emotionally if the adults provide them with a sense of safety and well-being in the aftermath of a traumatic event. So part of that, if you are the victim, or you know someone who's a victim of trauma, the most important thing to do is to lean in and understand, validate, get their experience, understand, they did not ask for that. It was not, they didn't wake up, just like you didn't wake up that morning going, oh, I can't wait for this incident to happen, or whatever that is, fill in the blank. Because this is about, again, us healing together, co-creating this dance here. But the realistic, protective, and compassionate treatment by adults or parents or whomever can become more meaningful than the trauma itself. So, because we need, validation is that part where our emotions and our reality and our experiences are seen and got and validated. And yeah, it was wrong what occurred, right? And that's empathy, that's compassion, and that's the antidote here that we're talking about, that lessens in the after effects, right? So if you do know someone with trauma, it's important that we're a source or resource of the, that we're, or maybe when the source of the trouble is within the family, realism and protection and compassion are in those moments when it's in the family is typically, usually in short supply. And in those cases, it's often not so much what actually happened that causes the persistent negative effects of trauma, or the trauma looping, or the trauma bond, or all that stuff that's occurring in the nervous system within and between in that dance, as it is the absence of the healing responses. What didn't happen afterwards. It isn't always what did occur, it's what didn't happen. Did you get comfort? Did you get someone you could turn to and talk about it? Did you get shamed? Were you made wrong and it wasn't your fault? And you took it on as your fault. So I suppose, think of it like this: in the midst of a tornado, a child may have sought comfort and protection from parents and was told, what tornado? It's a beautiful day. Go outside and play. Okay, that's how crazy the unsafe the world seems to some children. Like some survivors who try to tell the truth about the abuse and were called liars or accused of being responsible for the abuser's behavior. and then re-victimize and re-traumatize and made you're the problem for pointing out the problem. It's that denial, the attack, that vicious reversal, and you're the problem for pointing out the problem, the reversal of the blame. It's not your fault. And then they make the other person the victim, and you're the offender, you're the perpetrator for pointing it out. And okay, that's painful. Because when a victim or survivor is disbelieved, shamed, threatened into silence, or when the disclosure is minimized or becomes cause for more punishment, the traumas inflicted by willful ignorance compounds the original trauma. It exacerbates this. And I know many of you are still sitting in your pain and shame and hurt, still hearing those words that aren't true. And children, as children, we can all withstand a lot with the help of other people, especially going on with that. But conversely, denial, rejection of a child's normal thoughts and feelings about trauma can cause as much pain as the original trauma, or worse. It can actually get internalized and personalized, and because the world order that I call it again post-traumatic stress reordering of the brain, the nervous system, the hormones, the environment, everything, danger, danger, danger. So all that continues to go on. But when they minimize the damage of trauma, or, again, because the children need protection from further harm. But you see, in troubled families, it's not in the abuser's best interest to teach the child how to prevent further abuse. Because what would happen? Says no. If this child speaks up or says something or tries to leave or escape, what happens? More abuse. So the non-protective parent who denies or minimizes the abuse is usually very passive. And I've forgiven both my mom and dad a long time ago. They're both still living, but my dad was the aggressor. My mom was passive. I thought I was more angry at my dad, because he was the one doing the heavy lifting and all that stuff. But my mom was pretty much the one throwing me under the bus most of the time because of her own anxiety. So the child's usually going to be left to figure it out on your own. It's the best way to protect himself. So imagine, if you will, it's like this very difficult calculus problem that you're trying to solve. And this calculus problem is solved in this one way as a child. So let's say you were solving your calculus problem with 5th grade level fractions, decimals, integers, algebraic reasoning, and you didn't have the 12th level calculus problems to solve this trauma, right? So all that's occurring, right? And so now your little boy, little girl learn to solve, not really solve this calculus problem, but whether the solving was running away or getting angry or shutting down or going to the bedroom or crying or self-hurt, self-harm, food, sex, drugs, whatever these false solutions were for the real need for love and connection, belonging, right? All those things that we need to feel safe, right? All that's super important as we begin to look at that in the next couple minutes here, as we jump into some more of this information, because this is such important work, right? Such important work. So when I hope this is landing for everybody, and if you're feeling it right now, give me a call. I got a 30-minute free consultation, 310-560-0726, or text me and we can chat that way first. But what happens here, I don't want to minimize the damage of trauma, and so often people do minimize it, or they, because children need protection from further harm, and to get into that. So again, survivors rarely, if ever, we've never really benefited from the compassionate and reasonable reactions that would lessen the effects of the troubled childhoods. But we got to look at, given the enormity of what didn't happen after your traumas, it isn't surprising that we enter adulthood feeling numb, feeling anxious, afraid, or both, all of them. Protective numbing and reactive anxiety are, after all, very normal reactions to abnormal situations, right? Protective numbing and reactive anxiety, which is like the protective numbing is that disassociating, detaching, and reactive anxiety, the hypervigilance, scanning, looking around in the environment for danger, 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 right? So, clearly people were not meant to be physically or sexually abused. We are not wired for that, even though it's been around since the beginning of time. We're not equipped to understand abuse as it happens, not to feel the full force of that physiological response in that time. And again, the body keeps score here. And we cannot, in that moment, find meaning in that experience of the abuse. Each of these important elements of accommodation can only happen later in distinct stages. And that's the work we do when you come work with me using either attachment-based, emotionally focused type therapy, or deal with detachment, injuries, and bonds, or the EMDR, attachment-based eye movement desensitization. And we do a little bit of all these types of things here so we can get you to higher ground and to, talk about how you endured trauma, but how we've been pretending that our mind and spirit have gone to a safer place, but leaving the body behind to endure the abuse. We kind of fracture or split those parts off. And here, the abused child or children abandon reality, disassociating our minds from our bodies so we wouldn't be overwhelmed, and our ability to cope won't be shattered. So eventually, even a relatively minor trauma can provoke disassociation until we learn later how to integrate those experiences and have a bunch of these corrective emotional experiences so we can get beyond that X factor in the calculus problem that we're trying to solve and move beyond. So, as later in the case, let's say, of chronic abuse, particularly where you as a child or a child has no support, that may mean years later when this starts to come up, and you may not even be aware of it. You might find some familiar situation where you couldn't escape or couldn't flee, and all of a sudden you find yourself heated, hot, and angry, and you're like, where'd that come from? It was a 1, and I responded with a 10. So in the short run, disassociation is a very effective defense. It's that numbing, because then we can wall off what cannot be accommodated, right? We kind of like, it's going that fight, flight, freeze. It's that bear in the woods. You see that bear in the woods, right? Your body goes in, your brain, your amygdala, your nervous system goes in, your heart starts beating really super fast. Boom, 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 boom. And then you go into fight. You either fight the bear, run away from the bear, or flee, right? Or freeze. Like just your nervous system just shuts down, right? And you know what? That's adaptive. That's how we should be responding to bears when we're in the woods and there's a bear, right? However, if that bear is at home with you all the time and there is no escape, how do you numb out those feelings? You numb them out because you never know when it's going to be safe. It's unpredictable, right? And that can create some other stuff here too. But sometimes the actual memory of the abuse, because it's in the body, goes into this kind of a deep freeze, right? It's frozen inside. And an incident is, that may present or may trigger strong feelings that really belong to an incident in the past in that wounded child, and we're not aware that it continues to resurface and reenact itself in different ways. And that's what we're here to heal. And you may see the survivor may become enraged by what merely annoys others. Like a 1 can be a 10. And a word or a look or a tone. I remember anybody who would make like a scowly, disapproving face would remind me of my dad and mom. I would get triggered. And I get devastated when others are maybe momentarily sad or panicked when others are just worried. Right? So all these present events tap into a deep well of feelings, and these sources remain elusive because we don't slow things down because it goes so quickly, it goes so fast, the speed of thought, the speed of the impulse itself. To slow it down. Because when asked what the worst memory from their childhood is, many survivors will reply with, my worst memory has yet to surface, right? You might say something like that. Your worst memory is yet to surface. But again, we're kind of like reenacting it because sometimes only the feelings go into deep freeze. Like some survivors have perfect, excruciating, detailed recall of abuse itself, but are numb. We numb out the feeling, right? Where the hearts are in deep freeze. Numbed out. And I know if you're not feeling connected out there, it's probably because we're numb and disconnected internally. Because it's scary to come out and be that vulnerable. And then, you may do fine when you're not provoked to feel too much. You may avoid friendships and romance, or kind of look at all the areas that you're avoiding in your life. If you're avoiding certain things, there's fear, shame, avoiding, hiding from love. The very thing we need to heal is relationship. And we only enter them on our own terms, right? Because we believe that our feelings are as troublesome and overwhelming today as the parents once told them they were, right? So trying to get love from a stone, trying to get love from the inaccessible, and keep trying to get love from all these different things. And we never really got that loop closed. Instead, stayed in that negative feedback loop, that trauma loop internally, and then we're numb to these feelings as a way to keep control. And I know it doesn't sound fun, but this is where it goes sometimes. So I'm hoping, because when we can come out of this deep freeze and start feeling again, and it's really amazing when we can actually name and tame the dragons here. But when many survivors ask me, if I don't remember the trauma, or I don't have strong feelings about it, isn't that better? Well, disassociation eventually takes far more effort than it's worth. The more we try not to, the more feelings and thoughts assert themselves. Really, this is just unconsciously demanding our attention every day, moment to moment. But you got to look at that. The conflict is perfect if you look at it as a way of mirroring back where we need to heal and grow. But it takes that kind of courage to do that, and I'm here to support you along that way. The more of the feelings you have here, it takes enormous toll to really keep this perfectly legitimate memories and feelings about our childhood trauma in this deep freeze. It's exhausting, actually, to hold on to something like a torch. It gets heavy, burdensome. In the long run, guys, it's better letting the thaw happen. And that is going to come with the support of others and participating in some manner of cure that will allow life to go on. And we're here, the antidote to all this is no more judgment, condemnation, or, learning self-care and self-regulating. And because here's what happens with some survivors, don't even have, don't know you have a highly recognizable and treatable anxiety disorder, and that's called post-traumatic stress disorder reordering. And this has been associated with survivors of the Vietnam War, the Holocaust, mass murders, natural disasters, rape, kidnapping, accidents, torture, coronavirus, extraordinary events, all sorts of stuff that goes on that can be traumatic. And it can reorder, again, the brain, the body, the nervous system, relationships. All those things get caught up in that vicious cycle of trauma. And there's no shame, because it's not you, it's something that happened to you, or was a violation of human connection against you. And because that's not internal, that's external, but with people, when we are with post-traumatic stress reordering, we often re-experience the trauma in our minds, but the memory brings on also a physiological response or feeling that is called this aberration, this release of emotional tension through the recalling of some repressed traumatic event. And often that situation then maybe brings on these aberration to reminiscent of the original trauma. Again, it's that reenactment of that original calculus problem that you weren't able to solve. And that could trigger by something someone says or does, or circumstances such as the press of a crowd, being left totally alone, or a darkened room. Anything that might trigger a sense of abandonment, or even a particular time of the year or anniversary, smells, touch, taste, or other things that can be associated with the trauma. All these anniversaries of 9/11, we remember the anniversary of all those emotions and feelings and thoughts coming back, and even now it's been almost 20 years ago, we still have that same memory, because the cell in our body, even we can feel that in our body. So the survivor here will get transported in a time machine to the event of the original trauma, and then reacts with this emotional intensity that would have been appropriate then, but not now. Right? It was something that we maybe wish we could have done back then, but it was difficult to distinguish what was from what is. What's that, now, and what was then, or maybe never ever happen again. But that is our Achilles heel for us survivors, right? That the way we function well in many aspects of life until we encounter these events or circumstances are likely to trigger these aberrations, that the emotional vulnerability and the physical illness, or evasive medical procedures, or struggles with authority figures, cultural oppression or abandonment, just to name a few that we tend to all go through. But this is your time. This is your time in the midst of all this crisis to begin to connect with yourself, right? Because a person with post-traumatic stress reordering or post-traumatic PTSD we have these persistent avoidance of stimuli that get associated with trauma, or numbing of our general responsiveness. So if you would like, I am writing a thing on my next book on the 7 trauma loops. If you're listening to this, you would like to get an email on the trauma loops and trauma bonds. There's 7 of them, and we're not going to go over them today, but I will send that as a free email to you, and you can read it and identify and respond back to which. And most of the time we can have 1 or all 7, depending on how long you've been, going through your own recovery, that. But this is where we'll start up there. But when we look at trauma, because people, again, with PTSD are re-experiencing the trauma in our minds, again, but it's not just in our mind. Again, the body keeps score. And all that is occurring, and we want to bring that time machine, we want to have that time machine slow down so we can get connected to that Achilles heel, that part of us that's been wounded by shame, or wounded by pain or hurt. Okay, the deprivation of those things. So we want to, get into this, and because survivors with PTSD, we may also avoid any intimate connection, right? Creating more of an avoidant or ambivalent attachment style, resulting in feelings of detached or estranged from others. Like if we're feeling really like we can't connect out there, it's because we're not connected in here. And that's a hard truth. And that's, I say that with kindness and compassion, and I hope you can receive that with kindness and compassion. But we train people with these very either hardline boundaries or rules, or soft rules, boundarylessness, or walled off. Either way we can go. But as survivors, we also have highly developed social skills that may seem to be extremely extroverted, but we're dealing with others may preclude like vulnerability or authenticity out of that fear of being seen or known. That you only get so close. So we can talk about movies or work or the weather, but more difficulty expressing our feelings. And I you can go back to a lot of these things. I had learned to compartmentalize things, keep certain things in the open, other things hidden. And I was so inauthentic. I was inauthentic even about my inauthenticity, because those were my constricted feelings that I didn't want anyone to know about, and that we don't want anyone to know about, and maybe we're not able to identify and really express the wide range of emotions, particularly the anger or fear or sadness that we so closely associate with the original traumatic events, or abandonment or fear. All that's co-occurring, it's being repeated. So these certain circumstances can take the disorder or reordering longer lasting and make it more severe over time. Because if the trauma is repeated, for instance, as in chronic physical or sexual abuse, then the disorder might persist more than it would have after only one incident. So repetition does not make one immune to consequences of trauma. Rather, it has this cumulative effect, and as unresolved trauma is layered upon unresolved trauma, and that becomes the trauma looping, trauma bond in the family, in that within and between, and also the secondary PTSD or trauma, the affect contagion or emotional contagion that can come when you're in relationship with other people. And so that's what we're here to heal, that space within and between, so that these traumatic events that are human in origin, for the most part, seem to have, again, more severe after effects than, let's say, natural disasters, right? Because hurtful and frightening as it is to be raped by a stranger or to be in the path of a natural disaster, the violation of human connection, the creation of a personal disaster by a loved one, is vast more bewildering and overwhelming for all of us. And if you've gone through that and have suffered that, this is an important thing that you call, and let's talk about it. Because call me at 310-560-0726, or email me at joe@rebuildingconnection.com, or we can book a 30-minute time just to talk about this stuff. Use this time right now while you are in quarantine. We're quarantining this together. We're all in this together, to focus on this and make this the most, take something. Don't waste our pain here. This is the beginning of reconnection, and that's usually going to be attributed to the, fortuitousness of the occurrence of a trigger. So the trigger itself is a mirror back to our healing, and even an event or circumstance can obviously be associated or reminiscent of the original trauma, and there also must always be this simultaneous occurrence of a positive trigger before the reconnection can actually begin and actually be rewired back into the nervous system. You have to have these corrective emotional experiences, because then, as a survivor, we found someone that we can be trustworthy with to talk to, whether it's a therapist or friend, partner, support group, minister, someone safe, right, where you can finally feel safe and sane enough to explore and accept all of these feelings that we've disassociated from or detached from or disavowed as painful as it is. And you may be in that place right now where the pain and disorientation can be, a certain way, but pain and disorientation can be balanced by focusing on the positive trigger, right? Noticing what you're noticing in those moments, and to respond, reminding yourself you have the power and freedom to choose something different. And during that process, they can also ask, okay, if I have the power and freedom to choose something different, why now? Why didn't I remember this 2 years ago or 5 years ago? Or the answer lies in the conjunction of this trigger along with the negative one, which tells this you as the survival, you can afford to reconnect now. You have the power, you have the judgment, you have the freedom, the insight, the support, the strength, the character, so that you can truly, that you did not have as a child, right? It is safe enough. Because the $96 million question we all ask, right, is, are you trustworthy? Are you trustworthy, or am I trustworthy? Are you there for me? Can I count on you? Do you have my back? Do I matter? Am I important? Is this safe enough? Is this safe enough? Can we get beyond this? Can we really take that next step? Are you accessible and responsive to my emotions, my needs? Are you emotionally engaging and safe? Because all those parts, those walled off parts of the trauma that we put in exile, was once the solution to that unbearable situation, that calculus problem. And eventually it just causes problems in our mind, in our heart and spirit, in our relationships with the child within and with others, and in one's work, in your work. Because trauma, if it's left unresolved, is destined to be reenacted in one of these vital aspects of the self, of yourself, of self. Whether you're, get into that drama triangle that we talked about before, the rescuer or hero, or the victim, or the perpetrator blamer, and that below the surface, below the awareness, and get above the awareness and becoming more of that creator and coach and challenger and to bring out that wounded child out of exile and tame the firefighter that is always putting out all these fires, and the manager of all that, so that we can begin to deal with some of these loopholes, right? This vicious cycle. So I hope this is tracking for you guys. This went a little bit longer than I thought it was going to go tonight, but I haven't been on for a while, so you can break this up in a couple. But we want to be able to recognize here that maybe the mother was exploiting you for her own ends, or the father is unjust, tyrannical, like a tyrant. I've just been watching Game of Thrones lately, and wow, you just see the world very differently. But here's the thing that neither parent ever want. If to say that that neither parent ever wanted to do. That's intensely painful. Moreover, it's also extremely frightening. Given any loopholes, most children will seek to see their parents' behavior in some more favorable light, right? This natural bias of children is very easy to exploit. There was a saying, it says, it's better to live in a world ruled by God than a world ruled by Satan. And as children, because we needed to have the big people in our life be safe in God, they must be God, and then if they're all good, I must be all bad, I must be the devil. I'm not saying we say that out loud. I say we say that because we walk around with that, that one up, one down, parent, child, sinner, saint, lover, beloved, all these patterns that we use to stay safe. Here's the thing. It gets frightening. And again, it's not just the child's body that is abused or neglected. Troubled families mess with your mind, your child's mind. And virtually all survivors believe that their ability to think, to intellectually master the challenges in their lives, was of their greatest strengths as children. Like other coping mechanisms, these are over-reliance on relationally maybe fell into adolescence became one of their greatest weaknesses, because we live by a sword and we die by that sword. So maybe we had to be super hyper vigilant or angry or stubborn or whatever, because children, we struggle to make some sense of the loved one's abusive, neglectful treatment. So here we go. If the child understood what abuse really was, right, and a random violent imposition of another's will, where there's domination onto a relatively helpless person, right, he would despair at such hopelessness and betrayal. But he uses every mental effort to make himself seem in greater control while transforming the abusive parent into a safe and loving caretaker he so desperately needs, who you so desperately need. And such of this lies of the mind require a mental gymnastics. So I want you to think about this. Children don't do this thinking in a vacuum. You didn't do anything in a vacuum. You weren't on an island somewhere having to come up with your own thoughts. Some situations we're told what to think. In most cases, we're influenced by the abuser's faulty thinking and by the rationalization of adults who passively enable the abuse to go on. And so children hear what those powerful adults say and what they don't say. And so you get that different types of parenting styles too. It could be the helicopter parent or the drill sergeant parent, right? The helicopter parent's power messages, and they've been kind of the helicopter, kind of like a hailstorm, interferes in this intrusion of sorts. But the basic power message to that is, you can't do for yourself, I have to do it for you, right? And then if you have a drill sergeant parent, more authoritarian, his basic power message is what? You can't think for yourself. I have to do the thinking for you. That disempowerment, and to become more coaching, being falsely empowered or being disempowered, is the part where, or the poison entitlement, where you get too much of a good thing or you didn't get enough of a good thing. All those things occurring, right? So here's the thing. On top of, let's say, the abuse or neglect or denial, again, the more and more, the stance, the denial heaps more hurt and pain upon a child by requiring, the child to alienate themselves from reality of their own experience. You know what I'm talking about. So, because in these troubled families, abuse and neglect are permitted. It's the talking about them that's forbidden. The unspoken rule is we don't talk about abuse. I see it all the time. We don't talk about it. Where the loyalty is to the abuse, self-abuse, and we grow up continuing to self-abuse ourselves. Okay, so this is important, because all those unspoken rules that when you come to therapy with me, right, all these unspoken family secrets that we have to break these double binds in to heal, right, to talk about this stuff. Because minimization, again, or that cognitive distortion, is that thinking error designed to protect the injured person himself, making it seem a little less injurious or injured. It's easy to do that. It's easy because if we had to admit that, hey, mom and dad were the devil, they weren't God, how unsafe would that have been? We get it later, but all the damage gets done, the brain damage, because we need a lesson for it can be. The lesson here as the survival, because then we can afford to embrace the full reality of the past, feeling safe. Refraining from denial is an act of courage for survivors, for you, by facing and joining in the truth. Again, I'm not here to blame anyone's parents, my parents, anybody's parents, but I'm here to understand ourselves and how we've chosen, quite literally, between being alienated from and isolated and ourselves and reality, are being alienated from family members who still deny abuse. And that denial is pain and suffering. denial. So in troubled families, we're thinking around who's responsible is, as it's convoluted as best. It's so many multiple dimensions co-occurring simultaneously that abusive parents externalize or blaming other people, places, things for their